Jessica hadn't wanted to come to this party. After spending the last 3 months working 12-hour days at the architecture firm, all she really wanted was to go home, order takeout, and watch something mindless on television. But her best friend Rachel had practically begged her, saying she needed to get out and remember what it felt like to be a human being instead of a walking blueprint. So there she was, standing in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, wearing a simple black dress she'd pulled from the back of her closet. The charity gala was packed with people from the construction and design industry. Men in expensive suits laughed too loudly over glasses of wine. Women in designer dresses clustered in small groups, their conversations floating over the gentle music playing in the background. Jessica grabbed a glass of water from a passing waiter and tried to look interested in the auction items displayed along the walls. She was studying a painting of the city skyline when she felt it, that strange sensation of being watched. She turned her head and found herself looking directly into the eyes of a man standing across the room. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and the kind of face that looked serious even when relaxed. He wore his suit like he was used to formal events, but there was something about the way he stood slightly apart from the group around him that made her think he'd rather be somewhere else too. Their eyes met for just a moment. Then Jessica quickly looked away, feeling her cheeks warm. She didn't know why such a simple exchange had made her heart beat faster. She moved toward the bar, trying to shake off the odd feeling. 10 minutes later, she was waiting for the bartender when someone stepped up beside her. "I'll have a whiskey neat," a voice said, "and whatever she's having." Jessica turned to find the man from across the room standing next to her. Up close, she could see his eyes were a deep brown, and there were small lines at the corners that suggested he smiled more than his serious expression let on. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted an excuse to talk to you, and buying someone a drink at a bar is pretty much the oldest trick in the book." Despite herself, Jessica smiled. "Points for honesty, I guess." "I'm Michael," he said, extending his hand. "Jessica." She shook his hand, noting the firm but not aggressive grip. The bartender brought their drinks. Michael handed Jessica hers and then surprised her by asking, "So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much would you rather be anywhere else right now?" Jessica laughed, a real laugh that caught her off guard. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels exactly the same way," he said. "Let me guess. Someone convinced you that you needed to be social?" "My best friend. She said I was turning into a hermit." Jessica took a sip of her drink. "What's your excuse?" "Family obligation," Michael said, and something in his tone suggested that was a complicated topic. "My father's company is one of the sponsors. I'm supposed to be here networking and making connections." "Sounds thrilling," Jessica said with mock seriousness, "about as thrilling as a root canal." He paused. "I'm Michael Hartley." "Hartley Construction." Jessica felt her smile freeze slightly. Hartley Construction. She knew that name very well. They were the company that had outbid her firm on the last 3 major projects. Her boss had been furious each time, ranting about how the Hartley family threw their weight and money around to win contracts. "Something wrong?" Michael asked, noticing her change in expression. Jessica hesitated. She could make an excuse and walk away right now. It would be the smart thing to do. But something made her stay. "I'm Jessica Morrison and Associates Architecture." Now it was Michael's turn to look surprised. A slow smile spread across his face. "So we're supposed to be enemies then?" "Apparently so," Jessica said. "Well, that's inconvenient," Michael said. "Because I was really hoping you'd let me buy you another drink and maybe tell me why someone who designs buildings for a living looks like she'd rather be redesigning her escape route from this party." Jessica knew she should walk away. Getting friendly with someone from a rival company was asking for trouble. But there was something about Michael's directness, his willingness to acknowledge the awkwardness of their situation, that made her want to stay. "One more drink," she said, "but then I really should mingle." 1 drink turned into 2. 2 turned into them finding a quiet corner where they could actually hear each other over the noise of the party. Jessica found herself talking about why she'd gotten into architecture in the first place, how she'd grown up in a small town where every building looked exactly the same, and how she'd dreamed of creating spaces that made people feel something. Michael listened in a way that felt genuine. He asked questions that showed he was really paying attention, not just waiting for his turn to talk. When he shared his own story about taking over more responsibility in his family's company, she heard the weight in his voice. He talked about the pressure of living up to expectations, of wanting to do things differently but feeling trapped by tradition. "My father thinks construction is just about putting up buildings as quickly and cheaply as possible," Michael said. "But I keep thinking about what those buildings mean to the people who use them." "Does that sound strange?" "No," Jessica said softly. "That sounds like someone who actually cares." They talked about sustainable design, about old buildings that should be preserved instead of torn down, about the way cities were changing and whether those changes were for better or worse. Jessica couldn't remember the last time she'd had a conversation like this with anyone outside of work. And even at work. People rarely talked about the deeper meaning behind what they did. By the time Jessica noticed how late it had gotten, most of the guests had already left. The waiters were clearing tables and the band had packed up their instruments. "I should go," Jessica said, though she didn't move. "Let me walk you to your car," Michael offered. They made their way through the nearly empty hotel and out into the cool night air. Jessica's car was parked at the far end of the lot. They walked slowly, neither of them seeming eager to end the evening. When they reached her car, Jessica turned to face him. "This was unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected?" Michael asked. "I'm not sure yet," Jessica admitted. "We work for competing firms. This probably isn't the smartest thing either of us could be doing." "Probably not," Michael agreed. He pulled out his phone. "But I'd like to see you again anyway, if you're willing to risk it." Jessica thought about all the reasons she should say no. She thought about her boss's angry rants about the Hartley family. She thought about how complicated this could get. But then she looked at Michael's face in the dim parking lot light and thought about how easy it had been to talk to him. How he'd made her laugh. How he'd listened like her words actually mattered. She took his phone and typed in her number. "Coffee," she said. "Somewhere outside the city where no one from work will see us." Michael smiled, and this time it reached his eyes completely. "I'll text you tomorrow." Jessica drove home that night with her mind racing. She told herself it was just coffee with an interesting person. Nothing had to come of it. But deep down she knew she was lying to herself. Something had started tonight in that crowded ballroom, and she had no idea where it would lead. Jessica woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and her phone buzzing on the nightstand. For a moment she wondered if last night had been a dream. But when she picked up her phone and saw the message, her heart did a little jump. "Good morning. I know a coffee shop about 40 minutes outside the city. Great coffee, terrible pastries, and zero chance of running into anyone from work. Interested?" She stared at the message for a full minute, her thumb hovering over the screen. The smart thing would be to politely decline, to say last night was nice, but they should probably keep things professional. Instead, she found herself typing back, "When? Today, 2 o'clock?" Jessica glanced at the clock. It was already 11. She had a mountain of work she'd planned to catch up on this weekend. But something about the possibility of seeing Michael again made all those blueprints and project timelines seem less urgent. "Send me the address," she typed. The coffee shop turned out to be a small place tucked into a quiet town Jessica had driven through but never stopped in. It had mismatched furniture, local artwork on the walls, and exactly 3 other customers when she arrived. Michael was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. "I took a guess on your order," he said as she sat down. "Cappuccino with an extra shot." "How did you know?" Jessica asked, surprised. "You seemed like someone who needs extra caffeine to deal with other people," he said with a slight smile. "Was I right?" "Completely right," she admitted, taking a sip. The coffee was actually excellent. What Jessica thought would be an hour coffee date turned into 3 hours of talking. Then Michael suggested a walk, and they ended up strolling through the small downtown area, past antique shops and a used bookstore. They talked about everything and nothing. Michael told her about growing up in his father's shadow, always being compared to the Hartley legacy instead of being seen as his own person. Jessica shared stories about her mother, who'd passed away 2 years ago and had been her biggest supporter when she decided to pursue architecture. She used to say that Yieldings are like people, Jessica said, stopping to look at an old brick building that had been converted into a bakery. They all have stories. Some are obvious right there on the surface. Others you have to dig deeper to find. "I like that," Michael said quietly. They stood there for a moment just looking at the building together, and Jessica felt something shift between them. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was gentle, like puzzle pieces quietly finding where they fit. Over the next 2 weeks, coffee became their thing. They'd meet at different places, always outside the city, always careful to keep their growing friendship private. Jessica told herself that's all it was. A friendship. Two people who happened to enjoy each other's company and understood the pressures of working in the same industry. But she knew she was lying to herself. Every time her phone buzzed and it was Michael, her whole mood lifted. She found herself sharing things with him that she hadn't told anyone else. The way she felt stuck at her firm sometimes, like she was just making rich people richer, instead of designing spaces that actually mattered to communities. Her fear that she was becoming exactly like her father, someone who prioritized work over everything else and ended up alone. Michael opened up too. He talked about the constant arguments with his father, who thought Michael's interest in sustainable building practices was soft and not profitable. He admitted that he sometimes felt like he was playing a role, being the son his father wanted instead of the person he actually was. "Sometimes I think about just walking away from it all," Michael said one afternoon as they sat by a lake outside town. "Starting my own company, doing things my way. But then I think about letting down my family and I can't seem to pull the trigger." "What would you do differently?" Jessica asked. "Everything," he said with a laugh that didn't sound entirely happy. "I'd focus on renovation instead of always tearing things down. I'd work with architects who actually care about design, not just cheap and fast. I'd build things that last, not just things that make money quickly." Jessica looked at him and saw something she recognized. The same restlessness she felt, the same desire to do something meaningful. "You should do it," she said, "yeah?" He turned to face her. "Yeah, life's too short to spend it pretending to be someone you're not." Their eyes met and held. The air between them felt charged somehow, full of things neither of them was quite ready to say out loud. 2 days later, Michael texted asking if she wanted to grab dinner instead of coffee. Jessica knew this was different. Dinner felt like a real date, not just casual friends meeting up. She changed her outfit 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress and drove to the restaurant with butterflies in her stomach. Dinner was at a small Italian place with soft lighting and quiet music. They sat across from each other and the conversation flowed as easily as it always did. But there was something new underneath it now. The way Michael's hand would brush hers when he reached for his water glass. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The way her breath would catch when their knees accidentally touched under the table. After dinner, they walked through the downtown area of the small town. It had started to drizzle, just a light rain that made the streetlights glow softly against the wet pavement. Neither of them suggested going back to their cars. "I need to tell you something," Michael said, stopping under the awning of a closed bookstore. Rain pattered around them. Jessica's heart started beating faster. "Okay. I know we've been calling this coffee and keeping it casual," he said, running a hand through his damp hair. "But that's not what this is for me, at least not anymore. I think about you constantly. When I'm in meetings, when I'm reviewing contracts, when I'm arguing with my father about the millionth thing we disagree on. You're the best part of my day, Jessica." Every single day, Jessica felt like she couldn't breathe. Everything she'd been trying not to feel, trying not to acknowledge, came rushing to the surface. "Michael, this is complicated," she said, but her voice was soft, not pushing him away. "Our companies are competitors. If anyone found out, it could cause problems for both of us. My boss already thinks your family plays dirty to win contracts. If he knew I was seeing you—" "I know," Michael said, stepping closer. "Believe me, I know. I've listed every single reason why this is a terrible idea. But here's the thing. None of those reasons make me want you any less." The rain was falling harder now. Jessica could hear it drumming on the awning above them, could feel the cool spray on her arms. She looked up at Michael, at this man who somehow understood her in ways no one else did, who made her laugh and think and feel alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. "What are we doing?" she whispered. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I don't want to stop." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. His hand lingered there, his thumb brushing her cheek. Jessica's eyes closed for just a moment, and when she opened them, she made a decision. "Come back to my place," she said. "We can dry off and figure out what happens next." Michael searched her face, making sure she meant it. Whatever he saw there must have been enough because he nodded, took her hand, and together they ran through the rain to where she'd parked her car. The drive back to the city felt both endless and too short. Jessica's mind raced with questions and doubts and possibilities. But when she glanced over at Michael in the passenger seat and saw him looking at her with that expression that was becoming so familiar, all those thoughts quieted. Sometimes you just had to take a chance on something, even when logic said you shouldn't. Sometimes your heart knew things your head hadn't figured out yet, and as they pulled up to her apartment building, Jessica realized she was done pretending this was just friendship. Whatever came next, whatever complications they'd have to face, she was ready to find out where this could go. Jessica's apartment was quiet when they arrived, just the sound of rain against the windows and the distant hum of traffic below. She flicked on a lamp in the living room, suddenly feeling nervous in a way she hadn't felt in years. Michael stood near the door, water dripping from his jacket onto the hardwood floor. "I'll grab us some towels," Jessica said, grateful for something to do with her hands. She disappeared into the bathroom and took a deep breath, looking at herself in the mirror. Her hair was damp and slightly messy. Her mascara had smudged a little. She looked like someone who'd just run through the rain with a man she was falling for, and somehow that felt exactly right. When she came back, Michael had taken off his wet jacket and was looking at the photographs on her bookshelf. She handed him a towel and watched as he dried his hair, making it stick up in different directions. It made him look younger somehow, less like the serious businessman she'd first seen at the gala. "Is this your mom?" he asked, pointing to a photo of Jessica and an older woman standing in front of a building. "Yeah," Jessica said softly, moving to stand beside him. "That was taken the day I graduated from architecture school." She was so proud. That building behind us was actually the first one I ever helped design as an intern. Just a small community center, nothing fancy. But she acted like I'd built the Taj Mahal. "She looks like she was a wonderful person," Michael said. "She was." Jessica smiled, even though talking about her mother still hurt. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said I needed someone who could make me laugh and challenge me at the same time." Michael turned to face her fully. They were standing close now, close enough that Jessica could see the water droplets still clinging to his shirt, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with rain. The nervous energy from earlier had transformed into something else, something that made the air between them feel heavy with possibility. "Jessica," he said quietly, "if we do this, if we cross this line, everything changes. You know that, right?" She did know. She'd been thinking about nothing else during the entire drive back. Getting involved with Michael meant complications at work, meant keeping secrets, meant risking her professional reputation. It meant opening herself up to someone in a way she hadn't done since her last relationship ended badly 3 years ago. But standing there in her apartment, looking at this man who somehow saw her for exactly who she was, all those logical reasons seemed less important than this one moment. "Stay with me tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael didn't move for several long seconds. Jessica could see him processing, weighing his own concerns and fears. Then he reached out and cupped her face gently with one hand. "If I stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to know this isn't casual for me. I'm not looking for something temporary or easy. Once I'm in, I'm all in, even with all the complications. Even with everything we'll have to figure out." Jessica's heart felt like it might burst. "Then don't walk away," she said, echoing the thought that had been in her head all evening. Michael closed the distance between them, and when his lips met hers, everything else fell away. The kiss started gentle, questioning, but quickly deepened into something that spoke of all the weeks they'd been circling around this moment. Jessica's hands found their way to his shoulders, then into his hair, pulling him closer, his arms wrapped around her waist, holding her like she was something precious he'd been searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Michael rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably tell you that I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you at the gala. Why didn't you?" Jessica asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Because I could tell you were thinking about running for the door," he said with a quiet laugh. "I figured buying you a drink was less intimidating than kissing you in front of 200 people. Jessica laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. It felt good to laugh, to feel light and happy and alive. They moved to the couch, Jessica curling up against Michael's side as they continued to talk. But now the conversation was different, more intimate. They talked about fears they'd never voiced to anyone. Michael admitted he was terrified of ending up like his father, cold and focused only on business. Jessica confessed that she sometimes felt like an imposter, like everyone would realize she didn't really know what she was doing. "You know what I think?" Michael said, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her arm. "I think you're one of the most genuinely talented people I've ever met. The way you talk about buildings, about creating spaces that matter to people, it's not fake. That passion is real and it shows in your work." "How would you know about my work?" Jessica asked, surprised. Michael looked slightly embarrassed. "I may have looked up some of your projects after we first met. That community library you designed last year, the one with all the natural light and the reading corners, it's brilliant. It actually made me angry that we were competing against your firm because I wanted to build it." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever taken the time to really look at her work, to understand what she was trying to achieve. Even her colleagues at the firm usually just saw projects as billable hours and portfolio pieces. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." They talked into the early morning hours, stopping occasionally to kiss, to hold each other, to simply exist in this bubble they'd created. At some point, Jessica got up to make tea, and they moved to her small balcony, sitting under the covered portion as the rain continued to fall. The city lights blurred in the distance, soft and dreamlike. "What are we going to do?" Jessica asked, voicing the question that had been hovering at the edges of all their conversation. "About work, about our companies, about all of it." Michael was quiet for a moment, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the rain. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I'm not giving this up. I'm not giving you up. We'll figure it out somehow." "People are going to talk," Jessica said. "If anyone finds out, there will be rumors. They'll say I'm sharing company information, or that you're using me to get insider knowledge. It could get ugly." "Then we keep it private for now," Michael said. "Not because I'm ashamed or because I don't want people to know, but because we deserve to figure out what this is without everyone else weighing in." Jessica nodded, knowing he was right even as part of her hated the idea of hiding something that felt so real and important. "I should probably tell you something," Michael said after a moment. "I've been thinking about what we talked about before, about starting my own company, doing things my way." Jessica turned to look at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. "I'm going to do it," he continued. "I've been making excuses for years, telling myself it wasn't the right time. But meeting you made me realize I've been waiting for permission that's never going to come. My father will never support the kind of work I want to do, so I need to stop waiting for his approval and just do it." "Are you sure?" Jessica asked, understanding the weight of what he was saying. "That's a huge step." "I'm sure," Michael said firmly. "It won't be easy. I'll probably lose my inheritance. My father might not speak to me for a while, but I can't keep living someone else's life." "You made me see that." Jessica felt a mix of emotions. Pride that Michael was choosing to follow his own path, fear about what it would mean for both of them, and something else, something deeper. The realization that this man was willing to upend his entire life to become the person he wanted to be, and that she had played some small part in giving him that courage. "When I design a building," Jessica said softly, "the hardest part is always the foundation, because everything else depends on getting that right. I think relationships are the same way. We need to build this on honesty and trust even when it's hard, even when keeping secrets would be easier." "I agree," Michael said, pulling her closer. "So let's start with honesty. I'm falling for you, Jessica. Maybe I already have fallen. This scares me and I don't know how everything will work out, but that's the truth." Jessica's breath caught. She could say something safe, something that kept her protected, but she'd meant what she said about honesty. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." Michael kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Then we'll be terrified together." As the first light of dawn started to creep across the sky, they finally went inside. They fell asleep on Jessica's couch, wrapped up in each other in a soft blanket, the rain still pattering against the windows. In the morning, they would have to face reality, make plans, figure out how to navigate the complicated mess they'd created. But for now, in this quiet moment, they were just two people who had found something rare and worth fighting for. And that was enough. Jessica woke up to her phone ringing aggressively on the coffee table. For a confused moment, she couldn't figure out why she was on the couch or why there was an arm wrapped around her waist. Then everything from the night before came rushing back, and she felt Michael stir beside her. She grabbed her phone and her heart sank when she saw 17 missed calls from her boss, Richard Morrison. The same Richard Morrison who never called on weekends unless something had gone very, very wrong. "I have to take this," she whispered to Michael, carefully untangling herself and moving to the kitchen. She called Richard back, already bracing herself. "Where have you been?" Richard's voice was sharp, angry in a way Jessica had rarely heard. "I've been trying to reach you for 2 hours. I'm sorry, I was asleep." "What's going on?" "What's going on is that we just lost the Riverside project," Richard said, and Jessica could hear him pacing in the background. "Hartley Construction outbid us again. That's 4 major contracts in 6 months, Jessica. 4. And now I'm hearing rumors that maybe there's a reason they keep beating us to the punch." Jessica's blood ran cold. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind where people are saying someone from our firm might be getting a little too cozy with the competition," Richard said. "Please tell me you haven't been stupid enough to fraternize with anyone from Hartley Construction." Jessica's mouth went dry. She glanced back at the living room where Michael was sitting up on the couch, running his hands through his hair. Their eyes met across the apartment. "Richard, I would never share confidential information with anyone," Jessica said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "You know me better than that." "I thought I did," Richard said, and the disappointment in his voice cut deeper than the anger. "But last week 3 different people mentioned seeing you around town with a man who looks an awful lot like Michael Hartley. So I'm going to ask you directly, are you involved with him?" Jessica closed her eyes. She could lie. It would be so easy to lie, but she thought about what she'd told Michael last night about building on honesty, about foundations and truth. "I've had coffee with him a few times," she admitted carefully. "We've talked about architecture and design, but I have never, not once, discussed our projects or our bids. I would never compromise this firm like that." There was a long silence on the other end. "Jessica, I've known you for 5 years. I promoted you because you're talented and dedicated. But this is a massive conflict of interest. The Hartley family doesn't play fair, and if you think having drinks with the son means anything other than him trying to get information, you're being naive." "It's not like that," Jessica said, but even as she said it, doubt crept in. Was it possible Michael had been using her? Had all those conversations, all those moments that felt so genuine, been part of some elaborate scheme? "I need you in the office first thing Monday morning," Richard said. "We're going to have a serious conversation about your future with this firm. And Jessica, and whatever this is with Hartley, today, or you can start looking for another job." The line went dead. Jessica stood in her kitchen, staring at her phone, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under her. Michael appeared in the doorway. "That sounded bad." "We lost another bid to your company," Jessica said, her voice flat. "And apparently people have been talking about seeing us together. My boss thinks I'm leaking information to you." Michael's face went pale. "Jessica, you know I would never ask you to do that. Everything we've talked about has been personal, not business." "I swear to you." "I know," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction, because how could she really know? They'd only been seeing each other for a few weeks. What if this whole thing had been a setup from the beginning? "You don't sound like you know," Michael said quietly. Jessica set her phone down and looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who'd opened up to her about his fears and dreams. Who'd held her last night and told her he was falling for her. But she also thought about the timing, about how they'd met right before his company had started winning all these bids. "How many times has your company bid against mine?" she asked. Michael's jaw tightened. "Jessica, don't do this. How many times?" 4 projects in the last 6 months, he admitted. "But I wasn't involved in any of those decisions. My father handles all the major bids. I've been working on smaller renovation projects." "But you knew about them," Jessica pressed. "Of course I knew about them. I work for the company. But I never asked you about your bids, did I? I never tried to get information from you." He was right. He hadn't. In all their conversations, Michael had never once steered the discussion toward specific projects or asked about her firm's strategies. But the doubt had already taken root, and Jessica hated herself for it even as she couldn't push it away. "My boss gave me an ultimatum," she said. End things with you or lose my job. Michael stepped closer. Then we'll deal with it. I meant what I said last night about starting my own company. I'll do it now immediately. That way there's no conflict of interest. It's not that simple, Jessica said, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. Even if you leave your father's company, people will still talk. They'll still think I can't be trusted. I've worked so hard to get where I am, Michael. I can't throw it all away. So what are you saying? Michael's voice was careful, controlled, but Jessica could hear the hurt underneath. I'm saying maybe this was a mistake, Jessica said, even though the words felt like glass in her throat. Maybe we moved too fast, got caught up in something without thinking about the consequences. You don't mean that, don't I? Jessica wrapped her arms around herself. We barely know each other, Michael. A few weeks of coffee dates and late-night conversations doesn't mean we're ready to blow up our entire lives for this. Michael stared at her for a long moment. Last night you asked me to stay. You told me not to walk away. What changed? Reality changed, Jessica said. Reality showed up with 17 missed calls and a threat to my career. Reality reminded me that fairy tales don't exist and that sometimes feelings aren't enough. So that's it? Michael said, his voice hardening. One phone call from your boss and you're done? You're just going to throw away what we have because it's complicated? It's not just complicated, it's impossible, Jessica said, and now the tears were falling. Can't you see that? Your father hates my firm. My boss thinks you're using me. Even if we tried to make this work, we'd be constantly looking over our shoulders, constantly defending ourselves. Is that really what you want? Michael grabbed his jacket from the back of the couch. What I want is someone who's willing to fight for this. But I guess I was wrong about you. I thought you were brave enough to take a risk on something real. That's not fair, Jessica said. None of this is fair, Michael shot back. But you know what? You're right. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I was an idiot for thinking we could make it work. He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the knob. When he turned back, his expression was unreadable. For what it's worth, he said quietly. Everything I told you last night was true. I wasn't using you for information. I wasn't playing some game. I was just a guy who met someone incredible and wanted to see where it could go. But I can't force you to believe that. Then he was gone. The door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than if he'd slammed it. Jessica stood alone in her apartment, surrounded by the remnants of the night before, the blanket they'd shared on the couch, the 2 teacups still sitting on the balcony, the towels from when they'd dried off from the rain. Everything looked the same, but somehow her entire world had shifted. She walked to her bedroom and caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked exactly like what she was, someone who'd just let fear win. Someone who'd chosen safety over possibility. Someone who'd pushed away the best thing that had happened to her in years because she was too scared to fight for it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Coffee this morning? You've been MIA and I'm worried about you. Jessica typed back a quick response saying she'd be there in an hour. She needed to talk to someone, needed to process what had just happened. But as she got ready, mechanically going through the motions of showering and getting dressed, all she could think about was the look on Michael's face when he'd walked out. She'd told him to go. She'd been the one to end it. So why did it feel like she just made the biggest mistake of her life? At the coffee shop, Rachel took one look at her face and said, Okay, what happened? Jessica told her everything. About meeting Michael at the gala, about their weeks of secret meetings, about last night and this morning's devastating phone call. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to sympathetic to concerned. So let me get this straight, Rachel said when Jessica finished. You met a guy who makes you happier than I've seen you in years. A guy who shares your passions and gets you in a way nobody else does. And you pushed him away because your boss is a jerk and people might gossip? It's more complicated than that, Jessica protested. Is it, though? Rachel leaned forward. Look, I love you, but you're doing that thing you always do. You're so afraid of losing control, so afraid of getting hurt that you sabotage anything good before it has a chance to really hurt you. You did it with Chris, you did it with that job offer in Seattle, and now you're doing it with Michael. Jessica wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat because Rachel was right. She had pushed Chris away when he'd wanted to get more serious. She had turned down that job opportunity because it felt too risky. She'd spent years building walls around herself, telling herself it was being smart and professional, when really it was just being afraid. What if Richard fires me? Jessica asked quietly. Then you find another job, Rachel said simply. You're talented, Jess, you'd land on your feet. But what if you don't find another Michael? What if you just threw away your chance at something real because you were too scared to take a leap? Jessica sat back in her chair, Rachel's words settling over her like a heavy blanket. She thought about Michael's face this morning, the hurt in his eyes when she'd called their relationship a mistake. She thought about how alive she'd felt with him, how for the first time in years she'd felt like someone truly saw her. And she thought about the choice ahead of her. The safe path or the brave one. The life she'd been living or the life she could have if she was willing to fight for it. The question was, which one was she going to choose? For 2 weeks, Jessica threw herself into work like never before. She arrived at the office before anyone else and left long after everyone had gone home. She redesigned the entire proposal for the downtown community center project, pouring every ounce of creativity and passion into drawings that she hoped would prove her worth to Richard and the firm. But no matter how busy she kept herself, she couldn't stop thinking about Michael. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart would jump, hoping it was him. It never was. She'd check his social media late at night, then hate herself for it. She'd drive past the coffee shop where they'd first met outside the city, then keep driving because she couldn't bear to go inside. Rachel had stopped asking if she'd reached out to him. The answer was always the same. No. The meeting with Richard on Monday had been exactly as uncomfortable as Jessica had expected. He'd made it clear that while he believed she hadn't intentionally leaked information, her judgment was seriously in question. She was being taken off the Riverside project pitch, and any future advancement at the firm would depend on her proving her loyalty and focus. Jessica had nodded and agreed to everything, feeling like a part of herself was being carefully extracted and locked away. The part that had laughed with Michael in the rain. The part that had felt brave enough to ask him to stay. The part that had believed for just a moment that she could have both a career and something real. It was Thursday afternoon when everything changed. Jessica was at her desk staring at blueprints without really seeing them, when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Hi, is this Jessica Morrison? A woman's voice, professional and friendly. Yes, this is she. My name is Lauren Chen. I'm calling from Riverside Community Development. We received your firm's proposal for the new community center, and I have to say we were incredibly impressed. Jessica sat up straighter. Thank you. That means a lot. Actually, I'm calling because we'd like to move forward with your design, but we have an unusual situation. We've also been in talks with a new construction company that's focused specifically on sustainable building practices. The owner reached out to us with some innovative ideas about green construction, and we think his approach would pair perfectly with your design philosophy. Something in Jessica's chest tightened. What's the name of the company? Hartley Sustainable Development. It's a new firm, just launched last week actually. The owner's name is Michael Hartley. Do you know him? Jessica's hand gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white. I've met him. Wonderful. We'd like to set up a meeting with both of you to discuss a potential collaboration. Would you be available next Tuesday? Jessica's mind was racing. Michael had actually done it. He'd left his father's company and started his own firm exactly like he'd said he would. And now their projects were intersecting in a way she never could have anticipated. Ms. Morrison, are you still there? Yes, sorry. Yes, I'd be available Tuesday. After Lauren hung up, Jessica sat frozen at her desk. She should tell Richard immediately. This was exactly the kind of opportunity that could restore her standing at the firm. But all she could think about was Michael, taking that terrifying leap into the unknown, building something from nothing, following through on the dreams he'd shared with her in quiet conversations. She grabbed her keys and left the office without a word to anyone. Jessica had no idea where Michael's new office was, or if he even had an office yet, but she knew where his apartment was. He'd pointed it out once when they were driving through downtown. She'd teased him about living so close to all the noise and chaos when he seemed like someone who'd prefer peace and quiet. She stood outside his building for 10 minutes, trying to figure out what to say. Sorry seemed inadequate. I was wrong felt too simple. I'm terrified, but I'm here anyway felt too vulnerable. Finally, she just pressed the buzzer for his apartment. Yes? His voice through the intercom, cautious. It's Jessica. Silence. Long enough that she thought he might not let her up. Then the door buzzed open. Michael's apartment was on the 4th floor. Jessica climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator, needing those extra minutes to gather her thoughts. When she reached his door, it was already open. Michael stood in the doorway wearing jeans and an old t-shirt, looking tired but somehow more at peace than she'd ever seen him. "Hi," she said, her voice small. "Hi." He didn't move to let her in, didn't smile, didn't make this easy for her, and she didn't blame him. "I heard about your company," Jessica said. "Hartley Sustainable Development." "Word travels fast," Michael said. "Lauren Chen from Riverside Development called me today. She wants us to work together on the community center project." Michael's expression didn't change. "And you're here to tell me that's not going to happen?" "No," Jessica said quickly. "I'm here because I was wrong. About everything. About us, about being too scared, about choosing the safe path over the real one." "Jessica, please let me finish," she said, and Michael nodded, finally stepping back to let her into his apartment. It was sparse, mostly empty boxes and a couch. He clearly hadn't been here long. Jessica took a deep breath. "When you left my apartment that morning, I told myself I was being smart, protecting my career, being practical, doing what made sense, but the truth is I was just being a coward. I've spent so long building walls around myself, telling myself that independence and career success were enough, that I forgot what it felt like to actually connect with someone." She moved closer to him, her heart pounding. "You scared me, Michael. Not because of the complications or the professional conflicts, but because you made me feel things I thought I'd stopped being capable of feeling. You made me want to take risks. You made me want to be brave, and that terrified me so much that I pushed you away before you could leave first." "I wasn't going to leave," Michael said quietly. "I know that now," Jessica said. "Or maybe I knew it then, and that's what scared me most. The fact that you were all in, ready to fight for this, and I was the one looking for an exit." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd seen him do 100 times when he was thinking hard about something. "I started this company for a lot of reasons. Because I wanted to do work that mattered, because I was tired of being someone I wasn't, but also because of you, because you showed me what it looked like to be passionate about something, to actually care about the impact of the work instead of just the bottom line." "How did it go with your father?" Jessica asked softly. Michael let out a harsh laugh. "About as well as you'd expect. He said I was throwing away my future, that I'd be bankrupt within a year, that I'd come crawling back when I realized how hard it is to build something from nothing. Then he told me not to bother coming to family dinners anymore. Michael, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he said, and there was strength in his voice. "For the first time in my life, I'm doing exactly what I want to do. It's terrifying and I have no idea if I'll succeed, but it's mine. I'm not living in anyone's shadow anymore." Jessica felt tears welling up. "I want that too. I want to be that brave." "What are you saying, Jessica?" "I'm saying I went back to my firm after you left and I tried to pretend everything was fine. I worked crazy hours and avoided Rachel's calls and told myself I'd made the right choice. But I was miserable. Because the truth is I'd rather risk everything for something real than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been." She stepped even closer, close enough to reach out and touch him if she was brave enough. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm asking for one anyway. Because you were right that morning. I'm falling for you. I already have fallen. And I don't want to be the kind of person who lets fear make all my decisions anymore." Michael searched her face and Jessica held her breath, waiting. She'd laid everything out there. No more walls, no more safety nets. Just raw, honest truth. "The community center project," Michael said finally. "If we work together, people are going to talk even more than they already are." "Let them talk," Jessica said. "Your boss might actually fire you this time. Then I'll find another job. Or start my own firm. Maybe it's time for that too." A smile tugged at the corner of Michael's mouth, the first she'd seen since she'd arrived. "You really mean that?" "Every word," Jessica said. "I spent 2 weeks being miserable without you, Michael. 2 weeks of trying to convince myself that my career was enough, that playing it safe was the smart choice. But you know what I realized? I don't want to be smart. I want to be happy. And you make me happy in a way nothing else does." Michael finally closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face the way he had that night in the rain. "I'm still terrified," he admitted. "Of failing, of letting you down, of all of it." "Then we'll be terrified together," Jessica said, echoing his words from that night on her couch. "But at least we won't be alone." When Michael kissed her, it felt like coming home. like every choice that had led to this moment had been worth it. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling, Jessica rested her forehead against his. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we build something," Michael said. "A community center that people will actually want to spend time in. 2 careers that we can actually be proud of. A relationship that's based on honesty and trust instead of fear." "That sounds like a lot of work," Jessica said. "It does," Michael agreed. "But I think we're up for it." "Don't you?" Jessica looked at this man who'd taken a leap of faith, who'd started over from nothing, who'd been brave enough to be vulnerable with her even when she hadn't deserved it. And she thought about the Jessica from 2 weeks ago, the one who'd been too scared to fight for what she wanted. That Jessica was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that the biggest risk wasn't in taking chances, it was in never taking them at all. "Yeah," she said, smiling. "I think we are." Outside Michael's window, the city stretched out in all directions, full of buildings that told stories, of spaces where people lived and loved and made their lives. And somewhere in that city, there was a community center waiting to be built, a project that would bring 2 people together in the best possible way, creating something that mattered. But first, they had this moment, this quiet apartment with its empty boxes and endless possibilities, this second chance that both of them had been brave enough to fight for, and that was more than enough to start with.